This creature can stop its own aging. This shouldn't be possible. We all learned that every living being ages. At least, that's what we thought. Cells should accumulate damage. But how can this animal reorganize its entire body without destroying itself? And if reversing age is possible, why don't other animals do it? Before we start, we need to challenge something you believe. When animals are injured or stressed, they either heal or they die. That's the rule we've always seen. So when people hear about this jellyfish, they assume it must be regenerating, cloning, or secretly reproducing. But that assumption is wrong. Let's take a look at how a jellyfish normally lives. A jellyfish does not begin life as the floating, umbrella-shaped creature we recognize. It starts as a microscopic larva, drifting in open water. After a short time, that larva attaches itself to a solid surface, like a rock or reef. Once attached, it transforms into something called a polyp. The polyp looks nothing like a jellyfish. It resembles a small sea anemone. It stays anchored in one place and does not swim. This is its earliest stable stage. From that anchored form, the polyp produces small juvenile jellyfish. These detach, float upward, and gradually grow into adult medusae. This is the normal direction of life: polyp to medusa, growth to maturity, forward only. And that's important, because in biology, development moves in one direction. But in this particular species, something unexpected happens. When the adult medusa becomes injured, starved, or exposed to extreme stress, it does not continue toward decline or repair damage. It begins to reverse. Its tentacles slowly retract. Its bell shrinks inward. Its body loses structure and collapses into a small mass of soft tissue. At first glance, it looks like decay, and this is where most people get it wrong. They assume the jellyfish is dying, but it isn't. But what happens next is the part no one expects. Inside that shrinking mass, the cells begin reorganizing. They do not create offspring, they do not produce clones, they do not release reproductive cells. Instead, they change identity. A muscle cell can become another type of cell. A nerve cell can lose its specialized function and become more basic. This process is called transdifferentiation. In simple terms, one mature cell becomes a different kind of cell. There is no embryo stage, no fertilization. The same body restructures itself from within. Gradually, the tissue mass attaches to a surface again. It reshapes and becomes a polyp. From that polyp, new medusae will eventually grow, and the life cycle begins again. But here is the part that changes everything. The original adult jellyfish did not simply recover, it moved backward in its own life cycle. So it doesn't just survive stress, it goes backward. And if that's possible, then something much bigger is happening. Now that we understand how the jellyfish resets, a much bigger problem appears. In every complex organism, aging is expected. Over time, cells accumulate damage. DNA gathers mutations. Proteins stop functioning perfectly. Waste builds up inside tissues. This gradual damage reduces efficiency and weakens the body. But here's the uncomfortable question. If aging happens everywhere, in every complex system we know, then why would one organism be allowed to escape it? As organisms grow, their cells become specialized. A muscle cell performs movement. A nerve cell transmits signals. A skin cell protects the body. Once those roles are assigned, they are not easily reversed. Now, if specialization locks cells into fixed identities, what would happen if you tried to undo that lock? In complex animals, reversing that specialization would be catastrophic. Reprogramming heart cells, nerve cells, and organ systems would disrupt the entire body. Development moves forward for a reason. Growth leads to maturity, and maturity eventually leads to decline. That is the normal rule, which is why what the immortal jellyfish does is disruptive. It does not simply delay aging, it reverses its life stage. It reorganizes its cells into an earlier form and rebuilds a simpler body plan. It challenges a major rule of biology. Aging is supposed to be irreversible. If even one species can interrupt that process, then aging is not an absolute law. It is something that can, under certain conditions, be undone, and that creates the real mystery. If reversing age is possible, why don't other animals do it? Why don't fish restart when injured? Why don't reptiles reset after starvation? Why don't mammals reverse when stressed? At this point, the mystery is no longer just about how the jellyfish resets. It is about why life did not make this the standard strategy, and that turns this creature into an evolutionary mystery. The word immortal sounds dramatic, but it is misleading, because the moment we hear it, we imagine something untouchable, beyond danger, and something that cannot be stopped. But that is not what is happening here. What the jellyfish avoids is aging, and not death. That distinction matters more than it first appears. Yes, aging is an internal decline, but death is an external risk, and the jellyfish has found a way to interrupt internal decline, but still remains vulnerable to everything around it. So even though it can reset its life cycle, it is not protected from the dangers of the ocean, and that immediately changes how powerful this ability really is. Now consider what would happen if a complex animal tried to do the same thing. In simple organisms like jellyfish, the body plan is flexible. There are no highly specialized organs that must maintain rigid structure. There is no centralized brain storing memory and coordinating billions of precise neural connections. But in a complex animal, reversing development would create massive problems. Rewinding a brain would mean losing memory and personality. Reversing a heart or lungs would disrupt circulation and breathing. Resetting reproductive systems would interrupt life cycles. The entire organism would need to dismantle its specialized systems and rebuild them from scratch. And during that reset, it would be defenseless. That kind of vulnerability is dangerous. Even a short period of weakness can mean death. So the very process that allows reversal could also become a fatal liability, which leads to a deeper evolutionary reason. In nature, the goal is not to live forever, but to reproduce successfully. If an organism survives long enough to pass on its genes, then evolution considers the job complete. There is no additional reward for endless lifespan. Once reproduction has occurred, longevity is useful only until reproduction is secured. Beyond that point, maintaining indefinite repair systems becomes costly and requires energy. So evolution did not forget immortality. It is selected against in complex organisms. Immortality exists, but it is only useful for certain very simple organisms, and that changes how we see this jellyfish. The immortal jellyfish didn't defeat death, it found a way around aging. At the beginning of this story, aging felt like an absolute rule. Eventually, the body weakens. It seemed unavoidable, almost like a biological law written into life itself. But this jellyfish forces us to look at that rule more carefully. It shows that aging is not universal. It is not something that every living organism must follow. In this case, the jellyfish does not remove death from its life. It still faces predators, disease, and environmental dangers. What it removes is internal decline. It interrupts the aging process itself, and that distinction changes everything. Because biological death is not always caused by aging, in many ecosystems, organisms die from external threats, long before age becomes the limiting factor. Predation, infection, accidents, and environmental changes often end life earlier than natural decline would. For this jellyfish, aging became unnecessary in certain conditions. So evolution did not eliminate death, it eliminated the aging clock. And this leads to a deeper realization. Maybe aging is not a fundamental obligation of life. Maybe it is one strategy among many. Some organisms invest in rapid growth and short life cycles. Some invest in complexity and specialization, accepting decline as the cost. Others focus on reproducing quickly, and a very small number remains simple enough to restart when conditions demand it. The jellyfish did not make immortality common. It proved that aging itself is not a universal law of life. And that shifts how we understand the rule we started with. Yes, complex life ages, but not because aging is an unavoidable cosmic command. It happens because, for most organisms, it is the most efficient strategy evolution selected. Which leaves one final thought. if aging is a strategy rather than a rule. How many other laws of life are simply solutions we have mistaken for absolutes? And that may be the real reset this jellyfish offers, not of time, but of how we understand life itself. We started with a rule. All complex life ages. It felt absolute, unbreakable, final. But this jellyfish showed us something important. Aging is not a universal law. It is a strategy that works for most complex organisms, not a rule that applies to all life. This animal did not defeat death. It revealed that decline is not mandatory in every form of life, and sometimes what we believe is a biological certainty is simply the most efficient path evolution chose.